Well, good afternoon, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here. And I see a lot of people still coming in. This is really a wonderful event, a wonderful crowd. And I was born and raised in Canada and grew up playing lots of different sports and ended up in California, work at university there now. So it's fun to travel and see how sport and coaching has evolved in different places. And I'm going to start with this quote. I saw this on the wall at UCLA in Los Angeles in the education department, and it always stuck with me. When one person teaches, two people learn. And this is something I share with my students a lot, and I use as a reminder for me that this is just another opportunity to learn. That's all it is. So for me, I always think like a kid. It's basically adult show and tell. So get to share with you things I've learned around the world and over the years. And in particular, I want to thank Pat and Peter for being such generous hosts and organizing this event. And of course, you for giving your most precious resource, your time, to get better and to share and to learn. And I mentioned this to Pat earlier. I've been very blessed to be able to do these types of events and learn from coaches all over the world. And what I've seen in the last few days here and what I've learned from speaking with you and coaches is that what you have here is world class. And I don't say that everywhere I go. This really is as good as it gets in terms of the information you're hearing and the types of messages that you're getting and the types of things that Pat and Peter share with you. It is really world class, and it's an honor to be here. So when Peter suggested, he said, okay, what would you like to speak about? And I said, well, how about just effective coaching, becoming an effective coach? And that's very broad, of course, but I thought that would be a nice place to share some of the things that you've been hearing throughout the conference and bring maybe some connections there. But if we're going to talk about what is good, what is a good coach, what is effective coaching, we need to start with the end in mind. So what does that look like? If we want to build to that, we have to have an image of what that looks like. What are we trying to build? And you have a very good image of that here that's been developed with the GAA, and you've seen this before, I'm sure. And you might add to this co-creating, so this idea of co-creating this development and personal development. And so you have a lot of great resources here that paint that picture of what good looks like or could look like. And what I've tried to do for you today, or what I'd like to do, is share with you, kind of work in that gap between research and practice. So in my environment, I work at a university, but I'm in schools and I'm with coaches every day. College coaches, high school coaches, youth sport coaches. I also work with Olympic coaches in Canada and the United States. So I go from conducting research, teaching coaches, to working with coaches. So I try and blend all these things together. And then also, I coach, and I have had the opportunity to coach my own children in different sports, growing up playing ice hockey in Canada and then coaching soccer and baseball a little bit in the United States. So you combine all these things together, I think it gives me somewhat of a unique perspective and be able to share with you what I've learned about what is good. What does good look like? And I decided to organize around 3 themes. And this is my mental model, or my thinking at the moment, if you will. I just finished writing a book where I tried to review as much information as I could, and these are the types of things that really stood out. And so I'm going to go through these 3 different examples or themes. I'm going to share some research and some practice on those areas, and some of this will be confirming what you've already heard today. So the 3 things that I want to share with you would be related to values-based coaching or behaviors, player-centered coaching, and reflective practice. So we'll start with values-driven behaviors. And again, if we start from your context and your world, and you think about what do values mean and why do we care about values, I see a very strong identity, a very strong sense of cultural values that drive what you do. I saw the similar thing in New Zealand. I see a bit of it in Canada. And it's wonderful to see that, and it really is a great way to bind together the work that you do. And this is a good place to start. So if we think about what we do as coaches, can we align our work, our everyday work, with this type of ideal, these values? So it's something we may never attain, but it's an ideal that we can strive for, right? And this idea of better people, I know sometimes it seems like it's easy to say and hard to really see in action in sport. Because once you get into the sport environment and it's competitive, these ideals sometimes fall aside as we strive to compete. And you're all competitive by nature. You wouldn't be coaches. All coaches are competitive. And so, but when I look across the best coaches in the world, they kind of transform themselves into moving beyond just focusing on the competition and the winning, which they want to win. Don't get me wrong. They want to win. But they do it in a way that puts people first. And this is a quote from Jill Ellis. You see a picture of her here. She was a championship collegiate coach in the United States. She's our women's national soccer team coach. They won the World Cup recently. And this is a direct quote from her: "Coach people first, sport second." Another example that I think you'd like that fits with that is one of the world's top golf coaches. And he's actually Canadian, but he's coached the world's top golfers, including people like Justin Rose and Tiger Woods. And I really like this message, and this is from him. "I'm not coaching golfers. I'm coaching human beings. I'm coaching people who deal with all these emotions, love and hate and fear and anxiety and pressures." So you see this common theme across the best coaches in the world, where they really start with the person. I'm coaching people who happen to be playing football. Okay, so my medium or my palette might be hurling or football, but at the essence of what I'm doing is I'm coaching people. Okay, and you heard it earlier. You've heard it several times now. But this idea of better people make better All Blacks, this book has been mentioned a few times. I was in New Zealand at a similar kind of conference like this, doing a talk, and the All Blacks coaches were there. 3 of them were there. And I had a chance to listen to them and meet them and talk to them, and I asked them specifically about this. Because, it's one thing you can read something in a book or hear something, say, well, is that really the way it is? And I asked him about this, and he said, yeah, definitely we focus on people first. Better people make better All Blacks, because we've learned our lesson that one of their rules is no dickheads, right? We don't have time for that. If you want excellence, there's no time for that. And they released arguably the best player in the world at one point because of this. And I asked him about the book, and he said, you know what, when that book came out, we were really angry. He didn't use those terms. He was a little bit more blunt about it. He said, because that person never told us they were going to write a book. They asked to come and follow us, and we thought they might write a little article in a newspaper or something, and the next thing we see is everything we do is in a book. He said, but then we realized that it doesn't slow us down at all, because part of our mindset is constant evolution. So a lot of the things you're reading in that book, we've moved on. But the key concepts are still there, but a lot of the specific things we've moved on. And some of the core values that align their work and what they do, these are 3, and there was a research paper mentioned earlier today. And I just want to mention, I'm going to go a little bit fast and share a lot of ideas with you, but this will be posted for you later, and you can go back to these things. And these are the 3 core values that really drive when they did the research with the All Blacks on what they do. Be vulnerable. You have to be open. You have to be vulnerable. Humility is so important. And this is something that young coaches I see struggle with, because you assume when you take the role of a coach, you have an image of what a coach is. A coach is supposed to be a leader, and the coach is supposed to be the one with the answers. But the best coaches are very comfortable being uncomfortable. I don't know. Let's figure it out. Let's learn together, right? Collective accountability, and then trust. And you see under trust, collective accountability, this is one thing I see with a lot of coaches too. You start out, you want to control things. You want lots of rules. All Blacks, no rules. And I've seen this with other great teams. No rules. There's not a rule. If you're late 5 minutes, you're running. Because there's life, context, things happen. You earn treatment, right? So they don't have rules, but lots of standards and lots of expectations. And then trust, I need to be able to trust you, and you need to be able to trust me. And a statement that captures that is, do your job. If everyone's doing their job, we'll be fine. And in fact, that is the same term that one of the best coaches in the world has used to build a legacy of championships in the National Football League in the United States. This is Bill Belichick, and he's the head coach of the New England Patriots, and our NFL playoffs are starting actually today, and they're seeded number 1 again. And there's a great film, if you really want to look into this a little bit more. The NFL Network did a documentary, and it's an hour-long documentary, and the title of it is Do Your Job. Phenomenal film that takes you across the entire season, which culminated in them winning a championship, on how they build this into their daily practice and how they do this as coaches. Do your job. So it's one thing to have values, and we saw earlier, Pat Daly mentioned I mold team. So we have these labels and these words and these concepts, integrity and commitment. But what does that really mean? So if you're working with a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old or even an 18 or 20-year-old, and you say, we're all about commitment, what does that mean? Every single one of those people, when you say commitment, has a different picture of what commitment means. So you have to show them what it looks like. Tie the values to behaviors. This is what commitment looks like. And we had a nice research paper that just came out recently where I thought it was a great example of how they built a culture of championships around values, and they tied those values to specific behaviors. This is at West Point, the military academy in the United States, the top military academy we have for the Army. And the director of their sports programming, because sports is a very big part of what they do there to build character, is they built this culture around these values and these standards. And in this paper, he describes, you see this quote I put here, you have to, if you want people to do the right thing, you have to describe what right looks like. What does that look like? Don't assume that they understand what integrity means or character means. You have to tie those two. When you do this, that's character, and tie it to behaviors. And I see this with coaches at all levels. They spend a lot of time building core values and mission statements and putting posters up. What does that look like? What does that look like for us in our team, in our environment? And I'll share some examples that I've come across I thought were kind of nice for what those values look like in different settings. A few months ago, the World Cup of Ice Hockey was held in Toronto, and they asked me to come and speak at the Hall of Fame. And I was in the room with this player. You see a picture of him. He won a championship. He played with Wayne Gretzky, and he now coaches. He coaches kids. And he said, one of the things I took away from playing on all these championship teams was these standards of behaviors that connect to values. So the coaches don't come in and give big talks about integrity and character. They have standards that represent integrity and character, okay? And one of the standards that he uses with his teams, and I thought this is a great, we miss the little opportunities. It doesn't have to be big things, just the daily moments where we can reinforce these values. Simple things like how you enter a dressing room or walk onto a pitch, right? And I've been at Olympic training centers where I see the best facility in the world. Athletes come in, they just throw their bags down, they get on their phone. This isn't any different. It's not a special place for them. I say, you have to make this special. It should be different, right? If you want to live these values. So, for example, one of the things they do is, and he tells all his athletes, when you walk into a dressing room, you put your bag down and you greet every one of your teammates and you walk in with enthusiasm. Every time you walk into the dressing room, because that's a behavior that's connected to values that matter to us in terms of building trust with each other. Simple things that make a difference. And then conversely, how you walk out of a dressing room. These simple moments, right, that are places where we can reinforce these values. And you may have seen this one before, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I thought it was an appropriate example to use. But it's a very famous example in the United States where it's hard to see. There's a player walking down the hallway here, but they have this painting. It's painted on the wall. It says, "Play like a champion today." And that's been there for years and years and years. And now it's a ritual. Every time they walk down this corridor, out of the dressing room, every player touches that sign, "Play like a champion." So it's another moment to reinforce the values that are important for us. So it's simple things like that. You think about in your context, what are the rituals, routines, symbols that we build into our everyday practice that reinforces our values on an everyday basis. And I encourage you to explore this if you haven't seen this yet. There's a book and a website called What Drives Winning that you may have heard of. It's quite popular in the United States at the moment. And there's all kinds of free videos on there with championship coaches. And this one I really like. I used it in a class recently. It's a soccer coach, a collegiate soccer coach, championship coach, talking, and it's just a short video showing how they built this culture of responsibility and ownership and sharing and trust around a simple idea called the green dot. And she got it from another championship coach. So you could have whatever symbol represents something special for you, they used a green dot. So they put green dots on water bottles, shirts, locker rooms, everywhere. And those green dots were constant reminders of what matters to us. And in fact, I shared it in a class, and I had a collegiate swimmer in my class. She was captain of the team. And she came up to me after, she said, "Oh my gosh, my coach just talked to us about this in the off season. And we're doing it." I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, we paint our fingernails and our toenails green. Every athlete, before every competition, we paint our fingernails and our toenails green." I thought, why not? What's the last thing a swimmer sees before they jump into the pool? They're staring at their feet in most cases. Constant little reminders of the values that we want to build around. All right, so we'll move on to the second one, player-centered coaching. And this may not be the right term, but it's a term that I thought made sense to me in terms of the act of coaching. What you do as a coach. So the main things you're going to be doing are designing and running practice sessions, training sessions, and coaching in matches or competitions. So what do we know about what works or what good coaches do in those settings? So I give you a moment to take a look at this. I was in Tokyo a few years back, and if you've ever been to Japan, you know that they love baseball. And this is a team, their Little League team, so 12-year-olds, that won the Little League World Series, World Championships, and they've won it twice, actually. And there was a nice report on how they became so good. And the secret to their success, 10-hour practices. You want to be world champion or not? You're laughing, but and I thought, okay, let's look into this a little deeper. So what they do is it'd be on a Saturday, it'd be a 10-hour practice. And they would be very strict in terms of, moving through fielding and hitting and then small-sided games, and they'd have lunch together. The lunch was prepared by the families. So it's a full-day affair, but it's not something, obviously, to me, that's cultural. There's no way we could do that in the United States or Canada, but it works for them. So what do we know, though, about principles of quality practice design? I would say less is more, and you've heard that theme throughout the conference. I've heard other coaches say that too, but we have research to back that up now. And I remember in 1992, the Olympics were in Spain, and I remember people walking around with T-shirts. On the back of the T-shirt it said, no pain, no gain, no Spain. And it was all about, if you're in the gym for 2 hours, I'm going to be in the gym for 3. If you're in for 3, I'm going to be in for 4. And it's like a badge of honor. Guess how many hours that we trained last week, and look how much time we spent. Never mistake activity for achievement. A great coach always told me that. I don't care how many hours you spent. Did you do anything that was meaningful and relevant? And this is a great example of that. That still is kind of a mindset. We got to do more. And in college football, we have our national championship on Monday. And this team, Louisiana State University, they won a national championship a few years back, but midway through the season, they fired their coach. I think they lost one game. Oh no. So we fired the coach, even though this was a championship coach. And the first thing the next coach did right away, next practice, was cut practice sessions by 75%. Said, we're losing on Saturday because they're dead by Friday. And they ended up winning almost all their games the rest of the season, and they won a championship the same season. So I think we have to be careful and always kind of pushing and pushing and pushing. We need to be careful and efficient with our practice design. So what does an efficient practice look like? This is one of the all-time winningest high school baseball coaches in California, and I've been working with the school for the last 5 years. And we got him on videotape talking about, what did you learn in 40 years of coaching? What makes a good practice? And it was great because you see some notes on the table. We didn't tell him to come in with notes. We just said, hey, coach, can you come in and share something? We want to capture it on video. And he came and he had these notes. He's all prepared. He said, there's 4 things. 4 things. If you have these 4 things, you have a good practice. And for him, it was practice with purpose. So every activity you design, there's no filler activity. There has to be purpose to the activity. Have variety in your practice. And remember, he's working with, say, 14 to 18-year-olds. So variety is important to keep them motivated and keep their attention. Make it competitive. Make it game-like. You've heard that all day. Make it competitive and make it at game speed. So if you have these 4 elements in a practice, you're on the path to having a well-designed, efficient practice. And you don't need 2 hours, and you need 75 minutes in his case, 90 minutes of these things. And this mindset is starting to filter into all levels of coaching I see around the world, where we're pulling back. Instead of training, we're thinking more in terms of teaching. And to teach, we need to think about principles of teaching and learning. And this is, you see some examples of research papers that have started to back this up with our best coaches, as well as anecdotal evidence from the world's best coaches. This is a coach who's won 5 national championships in the United States in baseball. And in his mind, he believes that everything you're hearing here today in this games-based approach is a key principle for success in coaching at all levels. What might that look like? You've seen some examples here today. What might that look like in action? I shared this book with Pat the other day. We had a meeting, and I really recommend this as a nice resource for your bookshelf. This is a coach, Alan Lander. He's based in Australia. He's coached all different sports from youth to Olympic, I think 35 years now. And it's a really nice book with lots of examples, all different sports, on how to design game-like practices. So you've got lots of great examples today, but this is another tool for your toolbox. And you can see he always maps out the practice space. So you think like an artist in a sense. You design the practice space so that there's minimal transition time from activity to activity in terms of setting things up and moving things around and player movement. And so he uses this grid approach, which other coaches use too, but I thought it was a nice example to be efficient with your practices. And another principle related to efficient practices that really resonated with me, I teach a graduate class on talent development, and so I've been around this for quite a while. But I had a chance last June in Los Angeles to go to Red Bull headquarters. So Red Bull, the energy drink, they have a race car team. They're based all over the world now. And they train some of the world's top athletes in a lot of sports. And they have training camps. They call them training camps. And I spent half a day there with their director of training and development. And what I took away from that, and you see a little video image at the bottom of your screen here. You could Google this or look it up. It's online now, but at the point they hadn't released it yet, and he shared it with us. And what they do in all their training camps, so they'll bring the world's best athletes to these training camps, and the whole purpose of the entire camp, 3-day, 5-day, week, whatever it might be, is to keep them in a state of discomfort. It's all about making them uncomfortable. And you've heard that also earlier today, but this one quote really stuck with me because that's not new. I mean, we have lots of literature on that in psychology and teaching and education about the need for discomfort to grow. I mean, it's same physical training, same principle. You have to break down muscle to build it up, right? But what they do is, he said, our whole goal is to put them in practice and training situations where there's high perceived risk, but low actual risk. So they're shaking in their boots, so to speak, and they're really nervous, and they hook them up the whole week. They wear heart rate monitors, and they take biometrics. They want them to be in a state of discomfort, and they want to know they're in a state of discomfort, and get them comfortable with being uncomfortable. And again, this is at the highest levels, but you could use elements of this at any age. And so, for example, I'll give you this, put it in context. They had the world's top snowboarder, one of the best athletes in the world. No problem jumping off mountains and down cliffs. Put him on a stage in front of 10 people to do improv. Heart rate through the roof. Through the roof. Got a video of this guy. No problem jumping off cliffs. Put 3 people in front of him and get him to speak in public. His heart rate, you see it on, and they put displays up. So he's no hiding. His heart rate is going through the roof. And we're not letting you off that stage. They coach you to learn how to deal with that. So sometimes I think we let our athletes off a little bit too early. It's okay to let them fail. It's okay to let them struggle. It's okay to have an ugly practice. That's okay if we coach them along the way. And we sometimes call that finding the sweet spot, that optimal balance between challenge and skill. And I like to call it stretch training. So they might be able to do that. If they really stretch, they might be able to do that activity with the right kind of coaching and right kind of environment. If I can keep them in that environment, I'm not going to have discipline issues. I'm not going to have kids off task because they're in that sweet spot of learning and motivation. And another example of this in action that I really like to share is from this guy. He's considered the best volleyball player of all time. His name's Karch Karai. He won Olympic gold medals, outdoor and indoor volleyball. And now he's our women's national team coach. Our women's national team, we have some of the best athletes in the world. They had never won a world championship. 2 years after he took over the program, they won their first world championship. I happened to be in a room teaching a session with him 2 weeks after that championship. And we had a chance to talk a little bit, and I've read some other things about him. And for him, the epiphany or the moment that really helped him take the team to the next level was making them comfortable with being uncomfortable. So it's not just, I'm going to make you really uncomfortable. I have to create an environment where you feel safe to take risks. So think about it this way. So when I came into that team, I look around, world's best athletes, I go to a practice, everybody's trying to be perfect. Nobody's risking anything because they don't want to look bad. They don't want to make a mistake. And he flipped and said, I want every practice to look ugly. And that's what you see. This is his philosophy. And you see I circled it. Mistakes ugly. He said, if you came to watch the world's best team, you'd be shaking your head saying, this is the world's best team? They look awful. He said, that's the only way to get better. And I'm not going to yell at you and make you run laps if you miss a hit or you miss something. You have to be in that state of discomfort, but I have to make an environment that's comfortable for you to be uncomfortable and take risks. And this is a quote from him. If you're on a national team and you come out to practice, you're not performing for me. I don't want you to prove your ability. I want you to improve your ability. Okay? And you better be making mistakes. Now compare that to what we think of traditionally of coaching and what most athletes are kind of brought up in. Mistakes are bad. Don't make mistakes. And they get fearful of taking chances and making mistakes because somebody's going to yell at them. The world's best flip that. The other component I want to share with you related to the act of coaching or player-centered coaching is what do you do in a match or a competition? That's something we overlook, I think, a lot when we do coach development. We spend a lot of time on training and education and practice design. But what about a match? What do good coaches do in games and competitions on competition day? And what we see is the best get out of the way, right? And I have this term I like to call it puppet master coach. And we see it in basketball in the United States all the time, at all levels, where the coach is running up and down the court, yelling at the players. And it reminds me of like a foosball game, if you know what foosball is, turning the wheels, or a puppet mat, you're working all the players. But when we do studies, and we've only started recently to do studies where we compare successful and less successful coaches on their match behaviors, we see that the best coaches intervene and speak 50% less than the less successful and experienced coaches. They get out of the way. If you do a good job in the practices and the training, now's the time to sit down and watch. And one of the coaches I've been around like to use this term, says, when I'm in a match, I focus on listening to the match. I want to watch the match. And so you might set a goal for yourself. I do this with coaches sometimes. Pick your sport, whatever makes sense in your sport. And soccer, for example, might be take the first 10 minutes and make a commitment to yourself as a coach to not say anything in the first 10 minutes. Just watch. Take notes. Watch. Let it happen. Listen to the match, right? The other thing that you should be doing in your matches or your competitions is encouraging your players. Because again, it's going to be challenging. You want them to take risks. They're going to fail. They need the encouragement and the trust to try again, right? And there's some nice literature on this, and this is actually from a study where they asked athletes, what do you get out of having a coach encourage you in a competition? Does it really matter? Do you even hear it? Does it make any difference? And what they found when they tracked these athletes is that, you see the outcomes here, athletes who feel genuine praise, okay, that's the key, praise when deserved. So it's not some checklist, I got to give everybody 5 positives today. No, if they didn't earn it, they don't deserve it. Genuine praise. And it's not always an outcome. So maybe they didn't score, but they're in the right place, or they had the right idea. Genuine praise. Athletes perform better, their confidence is higher, so they're willing to take more risks, right? They have more fun, greater enjoyment. They rate their coaches as better. They like their coaches more, and they think they're better coaches, and they try harder. Why wouldn't you want that, right? We know it works. Last thing I'm going to share before I move on to the last theme related to coaching in competitions and during the season, for example, is how you bring closure to your season, for example. So you might have your last match, and I was talking to Pat Daly about this here. In many countries, it's common after our final match to have a banquet. He said sometimes you have like a dinner dance, for example. But how do you bring closure to this journey, this difficult journey that you just went on? There needs to be some closure to that. And this is a nice book I came across a few years ago. He's has a nice website with some resources on there. And he was a professional athlete, football player, and now he's a high school coach. And he's devoted his life to building young people through football and through sport. And so when they finish their season, when they finish their high school football season, they have a ritual that brings closure to this journey, okay? And I'll show you, it's called the last practice ritual. So after their final practice, these are 15 to 18-year-old players. So here's an example of a high school practice field in the United States for football. They go into the dressing room, they change, shower, then they come back out onto the field holding hands in pairs. The senior players come first. They walk out, they walk around the school campus or the club campus, and they pause at places of significance that represent the values and the rituals. So there might be a tree that was planted to represent a famous alumni. There could be a bell that represents our strength. There are different symbols. They pause, they reflect. The coach might give a few words, or athletes or players might give a few words. They come back to the field. They finish at the field. The departing or senior leaders on the team go on to the field. The rest of the team surrounds the field because it's not their turn yet. They watch. And the seniors or the departing players have time to make peace with that place where they battled, where they struggled, where they cried, where they failed, where they hurt. Some players run up and down the field doing sprints, others grab a piece of grass, others just sit. And it's a way for them to bring closure to this experience. But it also teaches all those other players standing on the perimeter what we stand for and how we help each other and how we build trust and values here. Okay? Last thing we're going to do is look at reflective practice. So we go from values drive our behaviors and standards to what does good coaching look like in practices, competitions, and rituals and routines, to how I become a better coach. Okay? This is one of my favorite quotes. I had a chance, very, very lucky, to spend time with Coach John Wooden when I worked at UCLA. And he's considered by many people to be one of the best coaches of all time. And I really have not ever met anyone else like him, just one of a kind. And if you haven't done so already, I really encourage you to look at some of his writings. This is one of my favorite books because it's just small, like two-page chapters, and it's all the people he's touched in his life, famous athletes, famous coaches, reflecting on a moment when Coach Wooden impacted their life. And so it's a good reminder of the impact you have as a coach and what we can strive for. And I like this quote from him. He used to always say, "What matters most is what you learn after you know it all." And I remember vividly, I got to drive Coach Wooden back from a lecture. So if you've ever been to Los Angeles, 12-lane freeway, crazy place to drive if you haven't done it before. And I was asked to drive Coach Wooden back to his house. I was, late 20s. And so I'm driving down the Los Angeles freeway with Coach Wooden sitting beside me. And the whole time, he's talking, but the whole time I'm thinking, don't become known as the guy who killed Coach Wooden. Okay? I'm like death grip on the steering wheel. And to give you an example of how, and he was 90, I think he was 90 at the time, 91, and just sharp. And they have carpool lanes there. And when you have the double line on a carpool lane, you're not allowed to get in or out of that carpool lane. Well, I wasn't paying attention to that. I'm in the carpool lane, and he was telling me where we need to get off. And so right away, I shoulder check, and I veer out. And he grabs my arm, and he gave me a little lesson on driving in the car. So he was a teacher to the last day of his life. That car was just another classroom for him to teach. So I love this. And also, the whole time I'm thinking, why is this guy asking me questions? What do I have to offer him? But he felt you could learn and should learn from everyone you interact with. So when we think of reflective practice, there's a lot of literature on this too, and I spend a lot of time trying to make it practical for coaches, because there's a lot of theory and research, but what does it really mean for you as a coach? What does reflective practice mean? And I like this idea of noticing skills. So to become more reflective, you need to make time to focus on learning how to notice things that matter. That's reflection. Because there's so many things in your environment, you don't need to pay attention to them all, but you need to know which ones to look at, right? And this is a nice example of that in action. This is one of the world's top aerial flight teams, the Blue Angels, the U.S. Navy. And if you're sitting beside each other, imagine flying 400 miles an hour, say 700 kilometers an hour, upside down, and you have the wings of a jet on either side of your shoulder. They're basically 18 inches apart. Upside down, they don't wear oxygen masks because they manipulate the cockpit so that they can do crazy maneuvers. Sometimes they black out. So you have to trust each other, right? And I had one of these pilots in a class one time, and these are the guys who go on to be astronauts. And I said, how do you make sense of all this information and all the instruments and pay attention to everything that's going on? He said, Wade, you got it all wrong. It's not about more, it's about less. I only need to pay attention to 2 or 3 things. That's what we train to do. We train to look at less, not more. And it was kind of an epiphany for me, because we always think it's more. No, the best, it's less. But it's the right less. And in fact, there's a neat study with rifle athletes, and they had them hooked up brainwave activity, and they were monitoring brainwave activity. They had expert, like Olympic level athletes, and novices. And the main difference they found was when the experts were in the act of performing or shooting, you could actually see a picture of it, their brain went dark. The novice, it was like a circus. The brain lit up, Christmas tree. The novice is looking at all kinds of stuff. The brain is going crazy. The experts shut it down. I only need to pay attention to 2 things. Same thing with the pilots. So can we help our athletes notice things that they should notice? And what about us as coaches? What are we looking at, what we should be looking at? The Blue Angels also do an activity every week where this is a nice little book where one of the lead pilots just published this, just a small little book on how they engage in reflective practice to get better all the time. And they have these lots of debriefing activities, and this is one where they call pick up the ball. Because a lot of times in our culture anyways, when someone makes a mistake or they blow an assignment, say, I dropped the ball on that one. They say, pick it up, pick up the ball. So when you make a mistake, acknowledge it. Who else should know about it? What are you going to do to get better at that? And as a coach, these are the types of questions we could be asking ourselves on a regular basis, maybe on a weekly basis. And in fact, these are some of the things that we do with our Olympic coaches. And I like this idea of the counter to the mistakes, because we spend a lot of time with our players looking for mistakes. And as coaches, we're often the best coaches in the world. There's a nice study that came out on this recently. They're serial self-doubters, constant self-doubt, constant questioning their decisions. But they balance that with supreme confidence. So as a coach, you want to look for weaknesses, but you also want to identify your strength. And there's a big movement to really focus on strengths. I saw earlier in a presentation there with a book, Strengths Finders. And what we do with our coaches, we get them, here's a coach doing this, to identify what are your strengths, what are you really good at? And how do you know that? We ask them to think about these types of questions. What was your best day of coaching this season or this year? Why was it the best day? Because you're at your best. When you're at your best, that's a strength. Let's do more of that, right? So build on our strength. The last thing we're going to share related to reflective practice is a deeper level of reflective practice. So reflective practice is daily and noticing and problem solving, which we all can do better. But when we take moments to go a little deeper and question our values and our frameworks, we call that critical reflection. And critical reflection is, in simple terms, thinking about your thinking. I know some of you right now are saying, oh my gosh, I can't keep up with the regular work. Now you want me to think about what I'm thinking? But the best moments, we might call it mindfulness or meditation, but they make time to reflect on why is that even a problem in the first place? So before we jump to problem solving, sometimes we should pause and do what we call in educational psychology problem setting. Why is that even a problem? Is it even really a problem that's worth my time and energy? Because I can't solve all the problems. Maybe that's one that I can let go. And this is one of the world's best coaches. He's an ice hockey coach, Olympic world champion. And I like this quote from him. I'm always asking questions. Too many of us as a coach, we have this idea that coach has to have the answers. The sooner you let go of that, the quicker you're going to start really enjoying your career and your path as a coach and learning from the people around you. Ask lots of questions. All right, so we're going to do one little activity here right before we finish. I'm going to show an image. You're going to see an image on the screen. I want you to either write it down or put it in your mind. What do you see? What's the first thing you see? And don't tell anybody around you. Okay, here you go. What's the first thing you see? Show of hands, how many people see an animal there? Okay. Now, how many people, show of hands, see two animals? Look around the room. Not many hands. Not many hands. Show of hands, how many people see a duck? Look around. How many people see a bunny or a rabbit? Very few. How can you're all looking at the same image, yet everyone sees it in a different way. You should be able to see both a bunny and a rabbit. And this is a really, really important point for critical reflection and why it's really important for you to make time as a coach to see critical reflection. 99% of the people, I do this all over the world, see a rabbit first, a duck. A duck first. Why do you see a duck first? Because your brain is designed to look for contrast. So what stands out in the image is this big long thing over here that looks like our brain associates that with a bill, so it must be a duck. That's where our brain goes right away. But I always have a few people who only see a rabbit first, and I even had one girl one time in a grad class could only see a rabbit. She could not see a duck. I said, okay, and it worked out great because I was hoping she would say something like, I said, explain to the group why you can only see a rabbit. She said, well, when I was young, our family raised rabbits. I've been around rabbits my whole life. Okay, remember that. This will have meaning for you in a moment. We're going to try one more, just for fun, because we have a minute here. One more. First thing you see. What do you see? Okay, share with the person next to you. What do you see? What do you see there? How many people see a frog? All right, everybody. How many see a horse? 8 people. Okay? Again, everywhere I go, everyone sees a frog. 1 or 2 people always see a horse. I had a grad student, very unique guy, world champion race car driver. He's a surgeon. And I said, how can you only, and he could only see a horse. I said, how could you only see a horse? He said, well, it's hard for me to explain. Can I show you? He took a marker, he went up to the board, and within about 3 seconds, he drew that picture of the horse. It was almost perfect. And he said, before I came into grad school, when I was younger, I was an artist, and I specialized in horses. Okay, why am I sharing this with you? And what's that have to do with coaching and reflection? Because a really key thing to remember as a coach is you don't see with your eyes, you see with your brain. And this book, I think, should be required reading for anyone who teaches or coaches or works with people. It's a fun read. It's written by a neuroscientist, the University of Washington. And it's a quick read, and it's based on science, but it's just a fun read. It's a quick, easy read. Anyone can read this book. And one of the key things from there is, one of the principles is the way we filter information, the way we see things, we see with our brains, not our eyes. That's why that girl could only see a bunny, because you don't see with your eyes, you see with your brain. The images come in to the back of the brain. They're reassembled into something that makes sense. Based on what? Based on your experience, based on your mental models. So we all have filters. It's like a picture frame. We all walk around with a picture frame, and that filters what we see. And that's important for critical reflection, because if we don't take time to reflect on our frame, on our mental models, we're going to miss stuff. And then we have conflicts with coaches, administrators, athletes, or players. Why? Because your players will never see what you see. They will never see what you see. because their brain is different than your brain. They have different mental models, different histories, different backgrounds, different profiles. So we have to spend more time asking, what did you see? What's that look like to you? Questions, asking ourselves, what did I see? Is it really are there other possibilities that what I'm looking at? And this is the last slide I'll leave you with, but almost all coaches were former players. At some point, you played the sport. So you have a mental model of what that sport looks like and how it should be played and how it should be taught. And that colors how you teach it. But your players will never see that. So you have to constantly use critical reflection, the best do, to question those mental models. And surround yourself with other people who don't see what you see, too. So those are the 3 key themes I wanted to share with you today. I think that kind of is a nice way to think about becoming an effective coach and what effective coaches do. I appreciate your time. Thank you.